Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The skies above Camelot had always been a steady blue, calm and dependable. But now, a swirling vortex of clouds gathered at the horizon, dark and ominous, casting an unnatural shadow over the land. The wind, once a gentle companion, was now biting and cruel, carrying with it whispers of distant thunder. It was an unease Arthur had never known in his years as king, and it stirred something deep inside him, a sense of foreboding. In the great hall of Camelot, Arthur sat at the head of the long, polished table, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the wooden surface. Merlin, standing at the large arched window, stared out into the darkening sky, his brow furrowed. "Merlin, speak. I know you've seen something," Arthur said, his voice firm but laced with concern. He had learned long ago that when Merlin grew silent, it was rarely a good omen. Merlin turned slowly, his gaze distant, as though his mind was still in a place far removed from the room they stood in. "Morgana has done something a broken bar reckless. She has awakened the Lord of Storms." The name struck Arthur like a hammer. He had heard whispers of the legend of the Lord of Storms, an ancient elemental force bound to the natural world, said to be a manifestation of the earth's wild fury. It was a creature of pure magic, unstoppable, untamable. If angered, it would bring destruction not just to Camelot, but to the entire continent. "And you're sure?" Arthur asked, rising from his seat, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. "I've seen it in my visions." The winds, the clouds said they are not natural. They are the signs of the Storm Lord awakening. Morgana believes she can control it, but she underestimates its power. "If we don't act quickly, the Lord of Storms will tear this land apart." Arthur's jaw clenched. "Then we stop it." "We'll do whatever it takes to protect Camelot." "Tell me how we defeat it." Merlin stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. "It won't be easy. The Lord of Storms is not a beast that can be killed by steel. It is a force of nature itself. But there is hope. An ancient artifact called the Storm Heart, a relic that holds the key to subduing the elemental. It's said to be hidden in the Skyreach Mountains, far to the north." Arthur nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then that's where we'll go." "We leave at dawn." Merlin hesitated for a moment, his expression grave. "Arthur, this journey will be perilous. The path to the Storm Heart is fraught with dangers, both natural and magical. And even if we find it, there's no guarantee it will work." Arthur placed a firm hand on Merlin's shoulder. "I've never sought guarantees, old friend. We do what needs to be done." By the next morning, Arthur and Merlin were already on horseback, riding north toward the Skyreach Mountains. The storm had only grown worse during the night. The winds howled through the trees, and the sky above them churned with dark clouds. Each gust of wind carried with it the promise of more violent storms to come. Arthur glanced at Merlin, who rode silently beside him, his eyes scanning the horizon. "How did Morgana manage to awaken something so ancient?" "I thought the Storm Lord had been bound for centuries." Merlin's lips tightened as he spoke. "Morgana has grown more powerful than we thought. She's delving into magics even I dare not touch. Her hunger for power knows no bounds, and now she seeks control over nature itself. But in doing so, she's unleashed a force that cannot be controlled. The Lord of Storms is no mere weapon, it is a living embodiment of chaos." Arthur's grip on the reins tightened. He had faced countless enemies, knights, sorcerers, beasts, but this was different. He wasn't battling a man with a sword or a monster with fangs. This was an enemy without form, without reason. A storm. As they rode, the landscape began to change. The trees grew sparse, replaced by jagged rocks and steep cliffs as they ascended into the foothills of the Skyreach Mountains. The winds grew fiercer, whipping at their cloaks, and the first drops of rain began to fall. "Not much further now," Merlin said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "The entrance to the temple where the Storm Heart is kept lies just beyond this ridge." Arthur squinted through the rain. Ahead of them, nestled between two towering peaks, was the crumbling remains of an ancient temple. Its stone pillars, worn down by centuries of wind and weather, jutted up like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. The air around the temple crackled with energy, and the wind seemed to grow even wilder as they approached. Dismounting their horses, Arthur and Merlin made their way toward the temple's entrance. The ground beneath their feet was slick with rain, and each step felt heavier as the storm intensified. Inside the temple, the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The walls were covered in strange markings, the runes that Merlin recognized as ancient spells, warnings left by those who had once worshipped the elemental forces. At the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and upon it rested the storm heart. It was a small, crystalline stone, pulsing with a faint blue light. As Arthur reached out to take it, the wind outside seemed to howl in protest, as if the storm itself was aware of their presence. Arthur held the storm heart in his hand, feeling its cold weight. "This is it?" Merlin nodded, his eyes fixed on the stone. "The storm heart is more than just a relic, it's a piece of the storm itself. With it, we may have a chance to communicate with the Lord of Storms, to calm it." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "And if we can't?" Merlin's silence was answer enough. The journey back down the mountains was even more treacherous than the ascent. The storm had grown into a full-blown tempest, with lightning striking the ground around them and the wind threatening to tear them off their horses. The air was charged with a palpable energy, and Arthur could feel the weight of the storm heart in his hand as though it were drawing the storm toward them. "We need to hurry," Merlin said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "The Lord of Storms is fully awake now. It knows we have the storm heart, and it will come for us." Arthur urged his horse forward, pushing through the wind and rain. His mind raced. They had the artifact, but they were still no closer to knowing how to use it. And with each passing moment, the storm grew fiercer. As they descended into the valley, the sky above them darkened even further, and a massive funnel of clouds began to form in the distance. It twisted and writhed like a living thing, and Arthur knew without a doubt that this was the Lord of Storms. "We don't have much time," Merlin shouted, dismounting his horse as they reached a clearing. "We have to confront it here, now, before it reaches the villages." Arthur followed suit, drawing his sword as the wind whipped at his cloak. The funnel cloud was growing larger, spinning faster, and within it, Arthur could see flashes of lightning and the vague, shifting form of something massive and ancient. "Merlin, how do we stop this thing?" Merlin raised his staff, his eyes glowing with magical energy. "The storm heart, it's the key. You must use it to connect with the Lord of Storms, to show it that we seek balance, not destruction." Arthur glanced down at the glowing stone in his hand, his mind racing. How could he communicate with something so powerful, so elemental? But there was no time to hesitate. As the Lord of Storms descended upon them, Arthur held the storm heart high, the wind and lightning swirling around him like a vortex. The sky roared, and Arthur could feel the immense power of the storm bearing down on him, threatening to rip him apart. But instead of fear, Arthur found clarity. He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy of the storm heart, reaching out with his mind, his heart, his soul. He thought of Camelot, of the people he had sworn to protect, and of the delicate balance between man and nature. The storm raged around him, but as he stood there, unyielding, Arthur felt something shift. The wind began to slow, the lightning dimmed, and in the eye of the storm, a great voice echoed through his mind. "Why do you seek me, mortal?" Arthur opened his eyes, and before him stood the Lord of Storms, a towering figure made of clouds and lightning, its eyes glowing with ancient, elemental fury. "I seek balance," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Not destruction." The Lord of Storms loomed over him, its form shifting and writhing like the wind itself. The towering figure of the Lord of Storms loomed over Arthur, a swirling mass of wind and lightning. It radiated an ancient power, and yet, as Arthur stood with the storm heart in his hand, he felt a connection to this elemental force, tenuous but real. The voice of the Lord of Storms echoed in his mind, a deep rumbling that reverberated through his very bones. "You seek balance," the storm rumbled, the words twisting in the air like the wind itself. But you carry the stone of control. Mortals always seek to bind what they do not understand. Author stood firm, lifting the storm heart slightly, its cool glow flickering in the tempest. I don't seek to bind you, he said, his voice steady, cutting through the roar of the storm. I seek only to prevent destruction. There is a place for storms, but not if they destroy everything. The Lord of Storms' form rippled with anger, flashes of lightning sparking across its vast body. Mortals destroy just as storms do, it growled, the sound like thunder rolling across the sky. You fight wars, tear down forests, choke the rivers with your cities. Who are you to speak of balance? Author felt the weight of the storm's accusation. He had seen the devastation of war, knew the cost of progress. But this wasn't the time to argue about the sins of mankind. We're not perfect, he admitted. But we can't let the land be consumed by endless storms. We need time to learn, to change. The storm seemed to hesitate, the winds around them calming just slightly. Merlin, standing nearby, his staff raised, whispered to Arthur, the Lord of Storms respects strength, but also truth. Keep going. Arthur took a deep breath, keeping his eyes on the swirling figure. I'm not asking for your obedience. I'm asking for a chance for the world to endure. You bring the rains, the winds, the forces of renewal. But unchecked, you will destroy what could be saved. If we work together, we can find that balance. For a long moment, the storm raged silently, the wind spinning in chaotic patterns as if reflecting the storm's own thoughts. Then, the voice returned, softer this time, though still powerful. You speak as if you know the storms, but you are only a king of men. Why should I listen to you, when all you do is command and conquer? Arthur stepped forward, his hand tightening around the storm heart. I know what it means to be a force, to lead, to protect, to sometimes destroy for the greater good. I have felt the weight of lives in my hands, just as you carry the weight of the skies in yours. But power must be wielded with purpose, not just with fury. That's what I've learned. The Lord of Storms crackled with energy, the lightning in its eyes flickering like a tempest on the edge of breaking. Purpose? It echoed, its form growing more defined, as though considering Arthur's words. You claim to understand, yet I see only a man holding the heart of the storm. Arthur's hand trembled as he raised the storm heart. This is not a weapon, he said, his voice louder now. It's a promise that we can do better, that we can coexist without chaos. The storm seemed to still, the wind slowing to a near calm. The figure of the Lord of Storms became clearer, its vast, swirling body condensing into a more solid form, though it still moved with the flow of air and electricity. It gazed down at Arthur, the lightning in its eyes dimming slightly, the tension in the atmosphere easing. You speak of coexistence, yet your kind has long sought to dominate the elements. You seek power over nature, not harmony with it. Arthur shook his head, stepping forward once more, now standing directly beneath the massive figure. I don't want power over you. I don't want to control the storm. I want to protect my people, and I believe that balance is the way to do that. There are times for storms, and there are times for calm. We need both. The Lord of Storms remained silent for a long moment, its gaze piercing. Arthur could feel the weight of its scrutiny, as if it was looking not at him, but into him, assessing the truth of his words. The wind around them stilled further, and the distant flashes of lightning became less frequent. At last, the Lord of Storms spoke again, its voice softer but still filled with power. You speak with conviction, King of Camelot. Perhaps there is truth in your words, but note these: a balance is a fragile thing, easily tipped by the greed of mortals. Should your kind upset the balance again, the storm will return, and it will not be so easily calmed. Arthur nodded, his heart pounding in his chest, relief washing over him like the first clear breeze after a storm. I understand, and I swear, we will protect that balance. The Lord of Storms regarded him for a moment longer, then began to rise, its form growing less distinct, dissipating into the sky. Then go, Arthur of Camelot, protect your people. But remember, there is no peace without the storm. With that, the storm began to break. The winds calmed, the dark clouds thinned, and the constant roll of thunder faded into a distant rumble. Arthur watched as the last traces of the Lord of Storms vanished into the sky, leaving behind a strange, serene silence. Merlin stepped forward, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. You did it, Arthur. You calmed the storm. Arthur shook his head, his eyes still scanning the sky. No, Merlin. The storm calmed itself. We just showed it that there's more to this world than destruction. They stood there for a moment, the quiet almost overwhelming after the fury they had just faced. Then, Arthur turned to Merlin, the weight of the storm heart still in his hand. What do we do with this? Arthur asked, holding up the crystalline stone. If it holds this kind of power, broken bar. Merlin smiled faintly. The storm heart belongs with the elements. It's not meant for mortal hands. We'll return it to the temple where it was found, and let it rest where it belongs. Arthur nodded, knowing that was the right decision. The power of the storm wasn't something to be wielded or controlled, it was something to be respected, just as the Lord of Storms had taught them. They made their way back toward the horses, the tension in the air finally easing, though Arthur knew the balance they had struck was a delicate one. Morgana's plan had failed, but she would try again, and the Lord of Storms would not forget the promise they had made. As they rode back toward Camelot, Arthur felt the weight of the future pressing on him, heavier than any sword or shield he had ever carried. He had faced countless battles, but this one had been different. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about understanding. And in that understanding, Arthur knew, lay the true strength of a king. The storm had passed, but it would not be the last. There would always be new storms, new challenges. But as long as he held true to the balance he had sworn to protect, Arthur knew he would be ready.